The average human blinks 20 times a minute. That's a blink every 3 seconds. But what can you do in 1.92 seconds? Not a lot. Yet this was the world record time set by Mark Webber and Red Bull Racing at the US Grand Prix in 2013. Between blinking, Red Bull Racing can change all 4 tyres and still have over a second to spare. And when millions are spent on gaining just 1/10 of a second on the track, time lost in the pits just isn't an option. This documentary tells the story of how a marriage of choreography, precision and technology has evolved to become one of the most important elements of Grand Prix racing, and how teamwork can make the difference between triumph and disaster.
Basically, the pit lane in a lot of circuits was just a painted line.
We came flat out in, flat out. We overtook in the pit lane, and there was no limits, there was no regulation. It was all free.
They can go wrong. They can go wrong, and there's no real rewind button.
You see the fluid, but you didn't think it was fuel.
It's changed Formula One forever.
When you look at Formula One with its slick image, it's difficult to imagine that it started in places like this. This is the circuit Ras de Gou in France, or as we say in Scotland, Reims.
From the start, the course leads past the stands into the first sweeping right-hand curve. The Reims course is 5.185 miles long.
Back in the 1950s, Europe had just come out of war, and people were used to danger. The drivers of the time were mavericks. Safety was not even a thought, never mind a concern. It's difficult to imagine when you look at this pit lane here in Reims.
The Grand Prix atmosphere is full of excitement and speculation. As electric starters set the engines into motion, the car parks near the start and finish line fill to capacity. The last few seconds before the start, in the front row, Fangio, Kling and Ascari.
Pit stops back in the 1950s were very different to what we see today in modern Formula One. I'm sitting here in the old Reims pit lane, and I feel vulnerable to the traffic that's passing on what is a normal French road today. Imagine Moss and Fangio going past at 180 miles an hour, mechanics exposed to those high-speed race cars. Back then, a pit stop could take up to a minute because you only had 2 mechanics servicing the car. And unlike today, where we've got high-speed wheel guns, they had to use a hammer to remove the wheel nut. 2 or 3 hefty hits on the wheel nut, spin it off, old wheel off. Thread is left-hand thread on the right-hand side of the car. Again, another couple of hefty hits with a hammer, and that's it. The driver would absolutely trust in his mechanics to re-enter the Grand Prix. Not quite 2 seconds, but 20 seconds or so?
I would reckon it.
Yeah, pretty impressive. Now, this layout was standard for the time. With the pit lane very much part of the racetrack, the mechanics would be positioned behind the wall, and they would have to jump over to service the car during the Grand Prix. Now, when 5-time champion Fangio won this race in 1950, he did so in a time of just under 3 hours. Several pit stops were required for fuel and for tyres.
By today's standards, it's hard to believe that this was once the cutting edge of Formula One.
No helmets, no safety gear. That's a milk churn, isn't it? For the fuel. Yeah. Where's the driver?
That's the driver there, isn't it?
Oh, is he helping?
Looks like it.
Maybe we could incorporate that.
Obviously, nothing to protect the driver at all.
No.
You know, not even put a screen in. There's just no urgency there, is there? Like, it's chilled as you like. But...
Off you go, mate. Yeah, it's completely different. It's no safety or anything, really. No pit wall, cars just comes in and out, people stood around.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few that got injured pretty badly. I mean, there must have been.
Yeah, they just don't realise how dangerous it is, obviously. They must have had lots of fires.
Right behind the driver's head,
yeah.
And he's just got a pair of goggles on. Yeah, I mean, it's progressed no end.
The pit lane was a very different place back then. You would have people like Fangio and Moss passing wheel to wheel at 180 miles an hour, whilst the mechanics serviced their competition. They were perilously close to danger. By the mid-1950s, had been about Alfa Romeo, the 158 and the 159. But their technological roots were very much in the 30s technology, and their days were numbered. Well, that day came when the iconic Mercedes 196 debuted at this very racetrack in the hands of Fangio.
Unveiled at Reims in 1954 to worldwide acclaim, this car was the ultimate in modern racing engineering at the time. In fairy tale style, it obliterated the competition on its debut, with the cars of Juan Manuel Fangio and Carol Kling finishing 1-2, just half a second apart and a lap ahead of the third-place Ferrari. But the team didn't just push the limits of the car kind to be used successfully in Grand Prix. Quite simply, a more efficient engine allowed for less time in the pits. It was one of the earliest examples of the kind of strategy we're so used to seeing in Formula One today.
Well, almost as quickly as Mercedes had arrived in the sport with their pioneering technology and thinking, they left again at the end of 1955. This followed a tragic accident at the Le Mans 24-hour race when one of their cars went into a spectator enclosure, killing scores of people. It was a dark day in the history of the sport.
The dangers of motorsport became worldwide news and led to its ban in several countries. The 1955 Le Mans disaster would be the beginning of racing's long, hard road to improve safety. This coincided with a new era in Formula One of considerably shorter races, inspiring a group of hopefuls to seize the advantage.
By the late 1950s, British engineers had arrived with a whole new approach that would turn the sport on its head and make pit stops a thing of the past.
The Cooper Car Company began the revolution in Formula One design by moving the engine and gearbox from the front to the rear.
Number 3 was the winner, the Cooper driven by Jack Brabham. A mighty good omen for British cars this season.
The emphasis was making the car more lightweight, efficient and nimble. This also meant that they were less thirsty for fuel and therefore perfectly placed to race from flag to flag. John Surtees, a Formula One world champion in 1964 and a team owner in the 70s, remembers the era well.
Very different times. From 1960 was the last year of the 2.5 litre formula, and we didn't have pit stops there, and we had basically a treaded tyre, which was all-weather tyre, so it wasn't changed, and the wheels were largely bolted on.
If you had to stop during a race in the 1960s, you'd be pretty certain your chances of a top finish were dashed. Pit stop technology was moving forward, but at a snail's pace.
This is something which we did in 1976. It was just a quick lift jack for a back. What happened is you had a little bar on the back of the gearbox, and you came along and looped that into it, put it down, and just lifted the car up. And the front one went under the nose and lifted up. And the air gun to take the nuts off. This wasn't for planned pit stops. It was for the possibility of unplanned pit stops. I mean, if you practice at it, you certainly wouldn't do it in under 2 seconds. I think we'd be talking about 2 or 3 minutes at least.
With planned pit stops consigned to the past, the pit lane became a much quieter place. Well, that allowed the cameras to focus on a different kind of action.
Forget her for a moment. There's faster stuff out there and hotter too.
At Kyalami, then, the emphasis was very much on pneumatics. Tyres, that is.
In the 1970s, many teams seemed to look at the pit stop as something clumsy and best to be avoided if possible. But as the 80s beckoned, it was left to one of Formula One's great visionaries to put the pit stop back at the heart of a Grand Prix and to use it as a tool to win the race. His name? Gordon Murray.
Well, I'm always looking for the next advantage. I'm a bit like that. I think my hero when I was growing up was Colin Chapman, and I sort of saw myself as a Colin Chapman type guy. I used to read the rule book to death and try and find a way, a loophole or a way around the regs for that sort of unfair advantage, if you like. I was thinking about the weight. I was always interested in weight saving. And 1 pound of weight equated to exactly 100th of a second a lap. And that was pretty constant. It didn't take long to do the mathematics and think, well, hold on a minute. You know, the fuel is a huge percentage of the car weight. So if you could halve that weight and go X many seconds a lap quicker, if you had a really quick, efficient pit stop, you could stop halfway through the race and then win the race just on the reduced weight. But there were other advantages too. One was half a tank of fuel, the centre of gravity is lower, of course, so the car's a little bit quicker every lap as well. But the other big one was tyres, because we knew we put tyres on at the beginning of the race and they degraded slowly during the race, so you were going faster because of the lower weight, but actually not as quick as you could have gone because the tyres were going off. And we knew when you put a new set of tyres on, they were 1, 2, 2.5 seconds a lap quicker for the first 5 or 10 laps. So what I did was I did quite a complex equation, which was the weight reduction, the centre of gravity, height reduction, and the new tyre advantage, and came up with a bogey time of about 26 seconds that we had to beat to make race winning with strategic pit stops. It's all very well having these theories and strategic plans, but of course, in practice, there are massive problems to overcome.
But Murray wasn't on his own. He called upon the skills of a group of men just as keen to steal an advantage over the competition. And much like their Brabham bosses, the English pub was the perfect place for them to hatch their plans.
Long time.
Long time. Better get a drink for these boys.
King's Head, mate.
Mate, some stories to be told about this place.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of old people that we knew over here.
The best one's Ayrton.
Ayrton Senna?
When he's won Formula 3 championship in 80 whatever.
That's how old he was.
This is where he celebrated. Two pints and they dragged him out of here.
2 pint screamer.
Cheers, boys.
When did you be here? That's what I want.
Bloody long time, Peter.
Oh, look, who's that geezer over there?
Is that a dog?
I got rid of the Tash, though, mate. There was a fantastic team spirit, though, under Gordon. I wouldn't describe Gordon as a hard taskmaster.
Oh, we worked hard, mate.
Yeah, we worked hard, but it was a really close-knit team.
Brabham was a fantastic little team. We were giant killers. I loved it. You know, we had a tiny proportion of the budget from, say, McLaren or Ferrari or Williams.
The man in charge of the budget and the team was F1's most accomplished dealmaker, and someone not afraid of upsetting the status quo.
Bernie Ecclestone was always up for something that was an advantage and something that pissed other people off as well. We both liked that.
Yeah, working for Bernie was an interesting element all on its own. But he was also a top bloke to deal with. You know, if you wanted something, you could make your point, he would do it.
But I've got to say, also, working for Bernie, we would go into the office at the end of the season.
What, you mean the pay deal?
To do your pay deal for the next year, and you go back to your workshop and you go, yeah, I've done a really good deal for next year. And you'd actually work it out on a calculator and go, bloody hell, he's done me in for 20 quid.
With Ecclestone's keen eye on the purse strings, Brabham would have to outwit, rather than outspend, the rivals in order to beat them. Making the pit stop work was a cost-effective way of staying ahead. But it soon became clear just how difficult that would be. The wheel nuts would need to be completely redesigned to allow for fast wheel changes. The fresh tyres that would be put on the car would be cold and take a couple of laps to generate optimal grip. And perhaps the biggest challenge was the turbo bearing on the BMW engine. Stay stationary for a few seconds, and the bearing would overheat and seize.
What we came up with for the wheel changing is we had air guns. We redesigned the hub and the nut on the car so that the nut for the new wheel was already in the gun. And then to get the car up and down quickly, we designed very lightweight titanium air jacks. And to cool the turbo bearing, because it was an airline, obviously, that blew the air jacks up, we took a tiny line off that and had an air jet on the turbo bearing housing. So as soon as the car stopped and the guy jacked the car up, there would be air cooling the turbo bearing, and that's how we got over that.
With these problems solved, Murray had to overcome the challenge of pumping 2 family cars worth of fuel into a Formula One car in seconds.
That was 2 beer barrels, you know, the aluminium beer kegs.
Beer barrels?
I think the more money spent on getting these painted and stickered up than there was on the bloody car.
We worked out that we could refuel at 2 bar, and we could get 30 gallons in 3 seconds, which was pretty spectacular. You had a filler on one side of the car and a breather on the other side. And when you opened the valve, it was just a rumble, almost like an explosion, and the car just went poof, 30 gallons in 3 seconds.
But using a pressurised fuel rig wasn't without its dangers, as the team discovered while testing it.
The new part arrived at Paul Ricard and had to be fitted to the car. The guys, of course, had never seen it before. It was a brand new bit, and the breather was supposed to crank up towards the top of the tank to clear the air all until it was full of fuel. And they fitted it the wrong way around. They fitted it downwards. So we dumped in the tank full of fuel with 2 bar pressure, and of course, as soon as it got to the breather, fuel had nowhere to go. And we had a mechanic sitting in the car, and it literally blew the car to pieces. And we were all standing around in shorts and T-shirts, and it had thrown a column of 30 gallons of fuel up in the air, which nobody saw. We just heard the explosion. So everybody's looking at each other, and it came down as a vapor, and we all got completely covered in fuel vapor. So it could have been a disaster, really.
Murray's solution for heating the tyres was almost as crude as the beer barrels.
In those days, there weren't any tyre heaters. There'd never been tyre heaters in Formula One. I was the first one to bring in tyre heating. But we didn't have the nice little electric blankets they have now that you wrap around the tyre. So we built a huge plywood blue tower that could take 2 rears and 2 fronts in a stack.
We built wardrobes practically to put the tyres in at the time, wasn't it? It was a big cupboard.
Yeah, it was a big cupboard.
With fan heaters blowing in.
Gas heater.
Gas heater, was it? Gas heater blowing in to keep the tyres warm.
And they were hot. I mean, there was, when you took them out the tyre cupboard, they were hot.
So we turned up with barrels on trolleys and these blue TARDIS boxes and all this kit and air guns and air jacks, and people wondered what the hell was going on, you know.
I think they all thought we were mad. I think they all thought we were mad, and they were waiting to see if it actually worked.
But they would have to wait a while. For although the Brabham team were capable of performing pit stops halfway through the 1982 season, an unreliable BMW engine meant that the car scarcely lasted long enough in the race to need one.
I don't think any of the teams thought it was a serious problem for them, because we tried and tried and tried to do a pit stop, didn't we? But we never went the distance to get to the pit stop for ages.
Ultimately, the season was a failure. But throughout the winter months, the engineers at BMW worked tirelessly to make their engine more powerful and, crucially, more reliable. At the same time, Murray and his team were working on a bespoke pit stop car for 1983. With a smaller fuel tank and the weight shifted to the back to aid handling, the result was one of the most striking Grand Prix cars ever designed. A car that looked fast before it turned a wheel. The BT52 had a vastly improved BMW engine, and the team was poised to stage a revolution. But having showed their hand the season before, Murray was convinced other teams would be copying them.
When we turned up in Rio for the first race in '83, I thought everybody would have pit stop cars, because it's not the fact that we failed because we had, you know, a lot of engine failures in the '82 season. I thought everybody else would have done the calculation, and nobody did.
I think everyone thought it was a bit of a joke, actually. But it didn't prove to be such a joke when the cars...
Well, actually won the championship.
When we actually got it together and were able to,
smash them up.
I think it was as if the 82 season had given everybody in Brabham's the familiarity of actually dealing with the pit stops. So when it was the 83 and it was a purpose-built car, we were ready to rock and roll.
And rock and roll they did, winning the very first race of 1983. The Drivers' Championship ended up going to the final race in South Africa between Brabham's Nelson Piquet and Renault's Alain Prost. But Brabham had the advantage when it came to the strategic use of pit stops too.
We generally went about 70% of the distance, which people could never understand when other people started doing pit stops. They would go half distance. But the reason I went 70% was because if you do the calculations, you could run the car right down to the ragged edge on minimum weight, because normally in those days we didn't have sophisticated computers measuring the fuel usage. So we had to calculate how much fuel you had. So you always left about 4 or 5 kilos of fuel in the car at the end, so you didn't run out of fuel and you weren't underweight. But if you ran 70% of the distance, you could then put in just the extra 10 litres of fuel at the stop to make sure the car would be overweight. So you'd be running right on the weight limit for 2/3 of the race. The only time we changed that is when we won the championship. At the end, we were up against the turbo Renaults, and we went to the last race at Kyalami for the South African Grand Prix, and Renault put masses of effort. It was ours to lose and theirs to win, really. We had to win the last race to win the championship. And they all knew by then we did 2/3 race distance on fuel. But what I did with Piquet is I only put a few gallons of fuel in Piquet. So he would demoralise Prost and the Renault and disappear into the distance, and they would basically give up, you know, and just hope something went wrong. And it worked perfectly. We just put, I think, 10 gallons in. Piquet came around in the lead, 2.5 seconds in the lead on the first lap, and Renault backed off for sure. And then, of course, Piquet came in on lap 10 or something and refueled.
Somebody else have an accident that you think about the danger element of it. And then you didn't think about it for very long, did you? No. I mean, it was just, and it was an accident, because as everyone would tell you, motor racing is dangerous.
The rule makers could also see the dangers of refuelling and banned it at the end of 1983, but allowed tyre changes to remain. And so Formula One pit stops became a race of changing tyres, with the best teams and drivers fighting to find that edge.
Well, although now separated from the racetrack, the pit lanes of the 1980s and 90s were arguably just as dangerous as this one here at Reims, long since confined to the history books.
Two men who witnessed the dangers of the pit lane in the 80s and 90s are Gerhard Berger and Jos Verstappen. Berger noticed how the driver could influence the speed of the pit stops whilst observing his world champion teammate, Ayrton Senna.
Me at the time, most of us, we wasn't really, we came in fast and we tried to do quick in the pit stop, But then when Senna arrived, he really was practicing over the weekend the entry of the pit, the exit of the pit. And suddenly, even coming in the long right-hand corner, as example, in Mexico or whatever, I said, what is he doing on Friday morning, going sideways in here? Because we all came in slow, we just came in quick in the race. So he was bringing in a new exercise, start on Friday, going quick through the bits. So suddenly already we had all this speed already in the bits, even on Friday.
Such practices also caught the attention of Red Bull's team manager, Jonathan Wheatley, who began his Formula One career as a mechanic at the Benetton team 25 years ago.
We were sat in the pit lane all the time in case a car came in with a set of cold tyres, just so that you could change tyres.
Yeah.
You know, you'd be sat there watching them come in flat out, top gear, and then pick a braking spot in the pit lane for their pit.
Yeah.
And the other one, the first time that we ever did 10-second penalties or 5-second penalties, they did it in Barcelona at the beginning of the pit lane with no speed limit. So Lacey came past us just snatching 6th gear. He must have been doing, I don't know, 160 miles an hour.
Whilst the speeds may have frightened the mechanics, a decade passed without major incident. But that period came to an end in 1994, when refuelling was reintroduced to spice up the show.
I just remember it was just a regular pit stop. Came in, stopped on the right spot, and I noticed that the fuel didn't go on properly. And then you see the fluid, but you didn't think it was fuel. I always opened the visor a bit because I was always sweating a lot, so the fuel also came in inside the helmet.
On lap 15 of the 1994 German Grand Prix, Jos Verstappen made a routine pit stop. But fuel spilled out of the refueling nozzle. It then ignited on hot components at the rear of the car. What followed would be a shocking reminder of the dangers of the pit stop and a defining moment in 90s Formula One. Jonathan Wheatley, working for Benetton at the time, remembers the moment well.
There was this, you can probably imagine, this incredible heat. You didn't have time to be scared, but one thing I did run, because it's a natural reaction, you run away from the heat.
It's not that you're scared about the fire, but you can't breathe anymore. It's like they put your head under water and you want to breathe. And then I had some burns in my face.
You're still handsome.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I had no problems with it.
Did it make you scared the next time you were doing a pit stop with refueling?
No, it wasn't a problem. It wasn't an issue.
Now, there was some rumour at the time, which, you know, a lot of water has gone under the bridge, so you can confirm or deny. There was some rumour that was a little bit of tampering with the rig, which may have contributed to the reason that there was a spill there. Was something to do with a seal or a gasket that was taken out to help speed up the fuel flow?
Well, there was a filter missing in the hose.
That's a tragic accident.
It was just missing, and that had the unfortunate side effect of making the fuel flow much faster into the car and giving you could say it would give you a faster pit stop. Unfortunately, it also proved a bit too much for the valve because it was faster than the valve was designed for, and yeah, that was the end result.
Yeah.
So I think that filter ended up back in after that.
Did it really? Yeah.
Lessons had been learned, and the mechanics at Benetton escaped with minor injuries. The fire happened in what had already been a difficult year for Formula One, with the deaths of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger at the San Marino Grand Prix. That fateful weekend also saw a loose wheel fly off a car in the pit lane, injuring a mechanic. Pit lane speed limits were immediately introduced, meaning drivers could no longer enter and exit at racing speeds. And this is the point where I come into the story. Ayrton Senna's death gave me my opportunity to race in Formula One. In a 246 Grand Prix career, which started at Williams, moved to McLaren, and ended at Red Bull Racing.
Wow. A little bit of Red Bull Racing history. Beautiful. Not that all of that engineering art isn't amazing, and that's where the success comes, but this is where it all began. They were still good-looking cars back then. They just weren't very fast. I enjoyed that period of Formula One, not because I liked the increased danger of refueling,
but it meant the cars were quite racy. So instead of starting a Grand Prix with 140 kilograms of fuel, you know, we could start with maybe 50 kilos or 45 kilos. So you had a really quite racy machine, which was fun to drive. When you come into the pits for your pit stop, you know, you're very aware of the fact that although you don't see the faces, you know that that's your crew. That's the mechanics on your car, it's the mechanics on your teammate's car. So you don't want to run them down. You certainly don't want to hurt them. Walk down memory lane.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Good to see you all. Did I ever run anyone down?
Yes.
Yes.
Where do you want to start?
I don't remember.
Yeah, Germany. How many marks didn't you hit?
What's interesting for me on this is that I guess in the sort of heat of the battle of what you're trying to do, you know, you're lined up, you assume you're in the right place and you're ready to go. So your senses are so heightened that I don't really remember running anyone down. When we were sort of preparing for this, I was like, never go wrong in pit stops. I was like, no, not that I really remember. But, God, I didn't realise I tried to single-handedly wipe out the entire team at some point during the course of a pit stop.
It's the adrenaline, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Why would you want to be part of that? Why would you want to stand there as a car comes in at 60 kilometres an hour, 80 kilometres an hour?
It's the same thing. It's the adrenaline of being part of it, isn't it?
You
Same
get
as driving.
Yeah.
It's the
You get
buzz.
it is the one time that you're part of it and you do influence something. Because whatever you do, completely...
Even more so now.
It turns the race around, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, we couldn't have the first car here if we didn't have a wee practice, at least with one corner. So 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh, we're there.
The old magic is still there.
You don't lose it, do you?
That was fantastic. That really was impressive. Now, I've got my road car outside. With come and sort that out as well. Pit stops with refuelling was part of the Formula One spectacle until the end of 2009, when it was banned again, mainly for cost rather than safety reasons. But it didn't diminish the pit stop's importance. With complex aerodynamics making it hard for cars to overtake on the track, changing four wheels and tyres was still a vital part of race strategy. And my ex-teammate, Mark Webber, was well aware that with change comes opportunity.
Literally just after you left, mate, obviously then the tyre, the refuelling was banned, and then we started to work out how much there was low-hanging fruit was there, was in terms of the guys have to deliver, and we've all got to nail it in one go, whether it's down to the guns, whether it's driver position, the height the car comes off the road, in terms of you don't want it too high, because obviously that's time, or just the minimum distance to get the car jacked up, tyres on and off, down as quick as possible. So I think banning and refuelling had a big, big impact on how much analysis went into changing the tyre independently.
Much as Brabham had been giant killers in the 80s, so a hungry Red Bull team was looking to find an edge over the establishment.
1.84.
And with the ban of refuelling, part of that edge would lie in a complete overhaul of its approach to pit stops.
You know, I look back to some of my notes from back in 2009, early 2010, and really it was complete blue sky thinking at that time. Well, you know, we went through every single aspect of it, you know, literally every single aspect, and we had a real motivation, you know, young, keen team, you know, young group of people, and I think we made a massive step, a huge step.
The whole ethos of everything changed, so the equipment got better. You know, we started introducing traffic light systems, automatic systems for pit lane release. You know, the technology had to step up. You know, we'd gone as far as we could with refueling. The emphasis was now on the three guys on each corner of the car doing what they can as quick as they can.
With the emphasis now on speed, Red Bull decided to leave no stone unturned in the quest to become the team to beat in the pits as well as on the track. Pit stop practice became now a daily routine, with every session logged and analysed.
Yeah, they're very loud, very, very loud. They're very powerful. I know they rev up to about 14,000 RPM. The torque is phenomenal on these. You only need a short little burst on the wheel nut. It's literally just a buff on and tightens it up.
1.8. When you get the call, you definitely feel the buzz. You get the 20-second call, and you're like, right, I need to nail this, I need to do it once, I need to do it right.
It's massive. Obviously, you're waiting in the garage. You can see, you roughly know when you're coming in for a pit stop, and you can feel yourself getting built up.
There is a lot of big crowd probably looking at the TVs, but you don't feel anything like that. You just got to go out and focus on yourself.
And then as soon as you hear it over the radio, you feel your heart rate starts going. By the time you're out there, it's over in a split second and you're coming back into the garage, but yeah, it's a really good feeling.
While much effort is spent perfecting pit stop technologies and techniques, human performance is paramount to fast pit stop times.
So feet shoulder width apart, sinking into those hips, then bringing in that little arm lift, stretch out everything. So it's powerful, it's explosive. That's it, that's it, rolling around on that fold. Perfect. The culture's changed massively. There's such a physical demand on the body when it comes to pit stop. And I think people have realised that perhaps drinking and smoking doesn't stand them in the best stead in order to be able to do that, not just for a whole season, but for a career. Always keeping pushed up, remember that head and neck posture. Lovely. We educate them on ideal ways to exercise, so what we're looking for in terms of good form. They then continue that whilst we're away. So in your little squat position, have a look. I want your shins vertical. Good, so nice and athletic, nice and low. There's an amazing fitness culture here. Instead of going and having their fish and chips at lunchtime, you'll see these guys going out for a run and then they'll eat their sandwiches at their desk. How far have we got, Chris?
No, it's changed a lot since I've been doing it. Yeah. You know, more races and more time away, so yeah, it all helps.
About 15-hour days, 16-hour days sometimes. Sometimes a bit less, or it might be a bit more. We've got a lot on.
As a driver, I was afforded the luxury of a physio. But these days, physios like John Hammond don't just work with the prima donnas. They ensure the whole pit crew is ready for action.
What's amazing is the pit stop is not their job. These are guys, you know, they're setting the garage up, they're building the car. And then suddenly on a Saturday, Sunday, they're asked to perform at superhuman speeds. They're tired, they might report poor sleep. We're in a faraway country, everyone's got jet lag. And then they do it. And you kind of think, everything is going against you in terms of all the uncontrollable factors. And it's amazing.
OK, doing your exercises?
Yeah, still been doing them.
My role is to look at any injuries that we get and try and build, or to help in treatment to fix them, but also build rehabilitation strategies. Yes, let's have you up against the wall.
Yeah, it's brilliant, really. It's like having your own medical service travelling around with you. There's doctors, physios, rehabilitation people, there's everything, really. It's only really drivers that have been looked after like this before, but now it seems to be the whole team that is being looked after like this to make sure we get through all 21 races.
To put the demands on the crew into context, the average human heart rate is between 60 and 100 beats per minute. At the 2016 Canadian Grand Prix, the Red Bull Racing pit crew wore monitors to gauge their heart rate levels at the pit stop. On the front left and right tire guns are Lee Stevenson and Simon Mickelberg. At the 20-second call before the pit stop is made, their heart rate increases slightly. But as Daniel Ricciardo enters the pit box and the team change the tyres, watch as Simon's heart rate almost doubles to 157 beats per minute.
So that's his, effectively his adrenaline fight or flight mechanism kicking in. Now, he's not under threat. This is a challenge for him, so he's using this increased heart rate to deliver oxygen to his muscles. He's using certain stress hormones, such as cortisol, which is a stress hormone that goes up in the body. They're a way in which the body can recall short-term memory, so it's a way in which they've learnt these motor skills and they can deliver upon them straight away.
Adrenaline also runs high for the 22 best drivers in the world. Used to racing at speeds of 200 miles an hour, the pit stop may not seem like a challenge. But getting it right is not as easy as it looks when it's your first time.
Yeah, my first ever pit stop, of course, happened in Melbourne because in F3 we didn't have any pit stops. So from there on, it was a very stressful moment because, you know, you come into the pits and you don't know what to expect, really. I mean, of course, you practice it, but, you know, in a race, it's a bit different. But luckily, everything went all right. I had quite a clean pit stop. I focused on my marks, and we had a good pit stop.
But even the best laid plans can go wrong. And when an error occurs, it can hit home hard.
I don't like talking about pit stops that go bad.
Yeah, I remember making a mistake in 2014. I felt awful. I went and stood round the back away from everyone for a little while. When you're trying to do a 2-second pit stop every week, unfortunately things will go wrong no matter how much you train or whatever, because there is a human element in it. There's definitely a couple of pit stops. I remember hitting Genty, my #1 at Red Bull, in Brazil. For a driver, as you know, coming in at an angle is obviously really bad. But if you can come in straight and long, you're only going to hit one guy and probably instead of 2 or 3 on the side. 10-pin bowling, I suppose, but I really hit Genty hard, and he, fair play to him, he hung on to it, and all the guys are moving. And there was another one, unfortunately, in Nürburgring when I was fighting for the lead there, and the guys didn't get the rear tyre on my left, and we actually injured a cameraman.
A wheel nut was cross-threaded on the rear of Webber's car, causing the wheel to fly off as he exited the pits.
It all happened very quickly. We knew something happened straight away. It's funny, on the day when I went to get the tyre for Mark, you know, I didn't run to the tyre. I went to see the cameraman was all right, and it wasn't nice to see him that way. The tyre was a secondary thing. Fortunately, the cameraman wasn't seriously injured, and yeah, stuff like that is unfortunate, but it just goes to show, split second, and nothing prepares you for that at all.
The incident forced a rethink to make sure it didn't happen again.
Now, all wheel nuts are retained. We have these little retaining clips on the axle here, so if the wheel nut goes on, it's not fully tight, you'll never be able to wind the wheel nut off. These here work as a clamp, and the wheel will never come off even if the wheel's actually loose.
Fortunately, the bad days have been few. But for the pit crew, perhaps the sweetest moment of all was the 2013 US Grand Prix, when the team recorded a record pit stop time of 1.92 seconds on Mark Webber's car.
It felt phenomenal as well. I mean, the difference between 1.9 and 2.2 or 2.3, I mean, 2.3 was about the average then, but it just on that day, every corner nailed the perfect stop, if you like, and all of their jobs.
For that to happen, everything has to be synced all together.
It's the synchronisation of it. You hear the guns go off, you hear silence in between, and that's when everybody's changing the tyres over. And then you hear, it sounds like one pit stop gun that's going off again. Wow, that sounded good.
Such a fast pit stop put a large target on Red Bull's back, but it took almost 3 years for Williams to beat the record, with the team's telemetry recording a time of 1.89 seconds at the 2016 European Grand Prix. It's clear what drives the team forward, to reclaim the title of the fastest in the pit lane.
After it, if you beat a car out the pit lane or you beat a car on track, then that's when you get a mega buzz, and that's when you know you've done your job right and fast.
You get 2 cars come in, that feeling of seeing the guy come in the pit behind you, you change the tyres on your car and it leaves before him. You know, that for me that's where I get my excitement from now. And the guys, when you see them high-fiving each other back into the garage, even with all the noise of the race, you hear them cheering because they know they've done a great job, you know. I think what we're doing now is extraordinary.
I think there's always little 1%, and you know, the process of marginal gains is, I believe, something ongoing, and it may be those 1% gains become 0.5% gains, but I think there's always something to add. Yeah, I think there's still more human performance gains to be made.
The general feeling, and my feeling, is it needs to be a human activity, you know, because we can make robots to do it. We can make robots, a car comes in, boom, boom, and it's gone out. And honestly, where's the sport in that? There's not really, it's a robot racing a robot. It's not really what we're about.
I'd love to have a go. You follow him in, like we used to. I can follow it in, take it off.
Big wheel nuts.
Bang it on.
Yeah.
I think I could do it just as fast as any of them. Bring it on. I'll do it.
Like everything in Formula One, the pit stop can never stand still. Gone are the days with mechanics with beer bellies and even some of the drivers. But in a sport that tries to remove human error, I think it still represents a fantastic example of human ingenuity and teamwork. The process may have changed many times over the years, but the essence remains exactly the same. Make it snappy, old chap.